Hi, I'm Brad Feld. I'm a partner at Foundry Group, a venture capital firm in Boulder, Colorado that invests in early stage tech companies all across the US. I decided to be open about my own struggles over the years with depression a couple of years ago. I've had three significant depressive episodes in my life, one in my 20s, one in my 30s, and one about 3 years ago. Each of these lasted more than 3 months, and they were situations where I was very functional. And I've always described myself as a very functional depressive. I can get up in the morning and get out the door and get to work and work at a pretty high and pretty intense level. But I've got no energy for anything else other than just getting through the day. And the way I came to describe my experience with depression was it was the complete and total absence of joy in everything I did. The first time that I was depressed in my 20s, it lasted several years. I spent a lot of time understanding it better, dealing with my issues sort of as a formative point as an adult. I was running a very successful company, and I ran this successful company through this period. And I was very ashamed of being depressed, this notion of weakness, this feeling that if I told anybody they might judge me, my own sense of confusion and lack of understanding about how I was doing things that either reinforced or alleviated the struggles that I was having. And eventually that depression lifted, and I didn't encounter a serious depression. Everybody has their bad days, but a really extended depressive episode, again, for about a decade. And that one came on the heels of a combination of the deflating of the internet bubble, this incredible intensity of work for an extended period of time, several years. And then the trigger for me was 9/11, where I was actually in New York, although I was never in harm's way, but had the same kind of existential crisis I think that so many people had on the back end of that. Again, I felt very ashamed, although here I was more open than just with my significant other and my partner in my business. I talked to some other people and I met other people that were struggling with mental health that were very significant and successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. That depressive episode passed pretty quickly, about 3 months, and in most recently, about 3 years ago, I ended up out of the blue becoming very depressed. And it was in a period of time where our business was going and continues to go extremely well. I was very involved in a lot of things that were doing very well. I was very, very happy in my relationship with a woman who I'd been married to for, at the time, about closing in on 20 years. I loved where I lived in Boulder, Colorado. So sort of all the outside characteristics looked phenomenal. Like, how could a person like that be depressed? And yet, physiologically, I had completely depleted myself. And I'd done it through a series of events. I ran a 50-mile race, and that was kind of at the beginning of what ended in this big cycle that turned into depression. And about 9 months later, I ended up having surgery for a kidney stone. And in between, the cumulative effect of both fatigue, intensity of work, not being able to give myself the time and space to recover from some of these things were the trigger. On the back end of that, as I was sort of in that depression, coming out of that depression, I was much more open about it, mostly because I'd been living my life out in the open. And I concluded that if I wasn't open about what I was struggling with, I was really being deceitful about my interactions as an entrepreneur and with other entrepreneurs and as an investor. I read about a lot of personal stuff, and this didn't feel like something that was appropriate to sort of bury in the corner. I also didn't feel any real shame associated with it at this point, because I'd transcended that. I'd gotten through that probably in the second depressive episode, and I'd spent some time talking to people about it when I wasn't in a state where I was struggling. It turned out to be a very powerful dynamic of being open about that, because I had many founders, entrepreneurs, senior executives, successful people reach out to me, many of whom said I was the only person they felt comfortable talking to. Some were people I knew, some were people I didn't. I had a lot of robust conversations about their own struggles with mental health, but then at a higher level, this stigma that as a society we put around mental health issues. When somebody has a broken arm, we don't question whether or not they're fit to be a CEO, or when somebody's got diabetes, we don't ask the question, is that person fit to be a founder? And in a lot of ways, there's no difference with struggles with anxiety, with depression, with different elements of what are commonplace, natural mental health issues. So being open about my own struggles, how I've dealt with them, how I work through them, the support that I get, is what really motivated me to try to help destigmatize this notion of mental health in the context of being a successful entrepreneur. Now, I think one of the challenges that we face today is that many of the technologies that we're developing and creating, both from a functional perspective as well as from a design perspective, create a negative feedback loop around mental health issues. If you think about this notion of being always on, always connected, always interacting, feeling this endless pressure to be responsive, being judged in the context of how engaged you are with whatever you're doing, whether it's social or work related, this idea that you're presenting a positive face to the world, or you're actually using something to curate your emotional state to present yourself, many of those things negatively reinforce a situation when somebody's struggling. And you probably notice this in your regular interactions. There's plenty of people who are on Facebook and then suddenly aren't. There's people that are on Twitter and then it becomes manic in terms of their response. This sort of notion of the dissonance between being able to engage and withdraw and use technology in a way that supports and enhances our sense of community, linked with the notion of the stigma associated with having any sort of issues with mental health, is something that broadly as a society we can start to evolve and change. And frankly, technology can help in a very productive and significant way. One very simple example of that is the dynamics. If you think about anyone who's ever been in therapy, especially somebody who travels a lot, the technologies that exist today make a remote relationship possible. Where even probably 5 years ago, a remote relationship with a psychologist or psychiatrist was probably not possible, or a relationship when you travel. Now, very, very simple example, but if you think about how you can turn that into something very powerful, and then recognize that there's lots of other technological issues that come from that. Privacy is a huge one. If you're not confident that your communications are private, it's a very, very dangerous place to go. But if you're comfortable that your communications are private, it's very enabling and very powerful. The last comment I'd make around this is I don't think this is a short-term societal issue. As humans, we're going to continue to have ebbs and flows in terms of how we think of each other, how we think of our society, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. I think as we get more advanced in how we have the discussion around mental health and mental health issues, and in the context of that, how to think about using technology to enhance and improve our experience as humans, I think those are very powerful things. Thanks.